Welcome. My name is Jana Papa-Eftimiou, and I'm the Chief Resilience Officer in the City of Portland, Oregon. I'm delighted to have you with us today as we talk about transportation and extreme heat, and to be joined by my colleagues Ryan, Eleni, and Carlos. I'd like to thank CoMotion for hosting us today. And I'm rather than read bios, I'm going to ask my co-panelists to introduce themselves. And when they do, they'll ask them to share with us their names, their locations, and their titles of work that they do there, and also to answer the first question, which is how hot is hot in your city? For me, in Portland, Oregon, we often declare an extreme heat emergency when we get to 100 degrees, and it doesn't cool off to more than 70 degrees Fahrenheit at night. And since Eleni has figured out how to work her camera first, I will turn it over to her to introduce herself next. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Eleni Mirivili. I'm from Athens, Greece. I'm the Chief Heat Officer in Athens and the Chief Resilience Officer. And we start calling heat waves when the temperatures rise to 37, 38 degrees Celsius for 3 consecutive days. But last year, I know this in Fahrenheit, we had a really nasty long heat wave, and very deadly one that reached the temperatures of 113 degrees. And that's very unusual for Athens, but it was a terrible heat wave, and it had a lot of peri-urban fires linked to it as well. So it was really bad.
Thank you, Eleni. 113 is the hottest it's ever been in Portland, Oregon, too. So we're tied in that. Let's see who gets their camera off next. Ryan, can you figure how to toggle on? Awesome. Welcome. Oh, and Carlos got it too. Thank you. Ryan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Ryan Stevens. I'm the engineering manager in the City of Phoenix Street Transportation Department in Phoenix, Arizona. Part of my purview is our Cool Pavement and Cool Corridors programs. Very excited to be involved in some of the ways Phoenix is mitigating and responding to urban heat. For us, being a native Phoenician, I can honestly say we don't really complain until it's over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's also around 105, 110, we start implementing some of our mitigation efforts and measures. And I just looked through, in July, we had 13 days between 110 and 115. So.
Wow, that's hot. And Carlos.
That's hot. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos Cruz Casas. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Department of Transportation and Public Works, Miami-Dade County. I know it's a long name, so let me summarize that for you. I think I consider myself a mobility management agency. Miami is hot in the full term of the word. There's a lot going on in Miami, a lot of things happening. But at the same time, it's very humid too, right? So I think when we call hot in Miami, the summer times, I would say everything over 90 degrees is hot. We do have about 50 days in the summer that is over 100. And those days, we're considered to be dangerously hot in Miami with the humidity index basically bringing that up. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on, a lot to talk about, opportunities for us to mitigate those impacts.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos. That brings us to our first question, which I think is kind of at the heart of things, which is about just to describe the impacts of heat and what you're doing about it. So I'm going to ask this question to go around, and then from there, I'll invite folks that are watching to use the chat question or the chat function, or if they would like to propose other questions, but we'll follow up after we kind of have the chance to tell the story about our key strategies. So the question is, how is extreme weather impacting transportation infrastructure in your city, and how is it impacting people as they try to get around the city, and what are you doing about it? Who wants to go first? Go for it, Carlos. Thank you.
Well, I was pointing at Eleni.
Oh, you were trying to point at Eleni. Hi, nice try.
That's good. That's okay. Eleni, if you want to go first, I'll be happy to.
That's very sweet. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So we have, Athens is a city that has been dealing with heat for decades. And of the last 2 or 3 decades, the heat has changed. It has become much more longer, higher temperatures and more frequent. But the people have been, I'm saying that because the people have been dealing with heat, they don't take it very seriously and they don't realize that the change is really significant. The impact that it has had for us is the days that we have extreme heat, we do have problems with aeroplanes that cannot actually take off. We have problems with trains that cannot, the tracks buckle, and asphalt which doesn't really melt, but it becomes kind of gooey, and we are worried about it. But the asphalt is not so bad. We haven't had any very serious problems with the asphalt yet for heat. Ryan, we can talk about the asphalt sometime together and heat. But what we've been doing is trying to, I mean, we can talk later about the strategy that we have for heat, so I can kind of put it in more kind of concrete pillars and what goes in each thing, and short-term and more long-term actions. But basically, we've been figuring out where the hotspots are in our city, and trying to focus most of the mitigation, heat mitigation actions in those areas, and figure out where the vulnerable populations live, and try also to kind of address vulnerability fast, like a little bit, like as much as closer we can, as soon as we know that the heat wave is coming. So some of the stuff that are kind of interesting that I can mention have to do with trying to create guidelines for how we approach the public space, so that the way that we use trees and nature and water in the surface and permeable materials are actually done in a way so that heat it lowers heat. This is not something that we are applying yet. We're in the process of designing these guidelines, which are then going to be adopted by 8 municipalities in the metropolitan area, and hopefully, slowly, all of the municipalities are going to adopt them, so that everybody builds in the same way the public space. Another interesting thing is that we have this app, our phone app, a smartphone app, that tells you what your risk is, depending on the temperature and your age and your gender and all that. But this year, we have also added not just heat, so it gives you personalized real-time kind of heat risk and tells you where to go to find shelter. But we've also added cool routes, which shows someone how they want, if they want to go from point A to point B, what is the coolest way to walk? Because, you know, we're all trying, in all the cities, we're trying to create like slow mobility and get cars out, because cars heat up even more our cities. But people need shade to walk and to bicycle. And I know my colleagues will talk a lot about this, about shading and creating the capacity for people to walk and to bicycle and do slow mobility in ways that are appealing and desirable. So this is something we're also doing. And for tourists in Athens to know how to go to the Acropolis by a cool route instead of, you know, the hottest road. And also creating green corridors slowly. We're a very densely built and densely populated city, so it's not so easy as Phoenix or Miami, for that matter, that have a lot of space. So I'll stop here because I don't want to, and we'll come back to it. I'm sure I can talk more about specific things that we do for the vulnerable populations as well, Jonah. Thank you.
It was a great call having Eleni go first, right? To just really summarize some of this stuff in there. So to me, and just to add to that, right? We all trying to build a city where we want to live in, a city where we're not to rely on automobile or some of these over the motor transportations is motorized. And all of a sudden, we talk about mobility and we talk about other things and the impact, but we're not talking about the impact someone using that or the alternate mobility solution, someone walking, biking, or even using transit, right? So to me, one of the biggest issues that we have is that we plan well for mobility, but then we want to invite people to come in and use the system, and yet we're not doing it enough to be able to mitigate some of those impacts that basically put people at risk, right? So to me, is that holding back our demand on transportation that we used to do. We're doing several things, and of course, I think we started with the typical idea that if you're hot, you need to cool it. Right, so we put fans in some of our Metro Mover stations and some of the Metro Rail station. We even introduced what I believe is the first air-conditioned bus shelter, right? And for sure, Miami-Dade County, and for sure in the state of Florida, but maybe in the nation, it might be, right? And I think we focus on those things, but then quickly start realizing that that might not be enough, because just cooling the place when you wait for transit, it doesn't help you the entire journey. Right. So I think now we're having a stronger conversation, a more dedicated conversation, or intentional on how we can actually create that pleasant journey for everyone. I was speaking with a good friend of mine. He's an HVAC expert for hospitals, and people were talking about what can you do in the hospital in the area, just put curtains and put AC or the window. And he said, no, the best thing we can do is mitigate the heat from coming in. Once the heat touches the glass or the wall, we're already at a loss in here. So start doing with mitigation external to the building. And I think this is exactly what we're having the conversation here with. We can do the same thing for transportation. We need to start mitigating the heat external to the transportation infrastructure. And now we're working very closely with our good friend, Jane Gilbert, the Chief Heat Officer, and James Merley, the Chief Resiliency Officer for Miami-Dade County, and talking about green corridors and canopy areas that we need to increase around transportation. We even now have a pilot with NOAA, basically to put sensors on shelters that within canopy areas and within low canopy areas, start understanding and measuring the impacts that not having an external mitigation to the transportation is having, and then we can start planning better for how to mitigate that. So there's a lot more that we're doing moving forward, but to me is, if we're not being intentional on making that connection to the transit system, making that bike ride, making that walk comfortable. And Miami's flat. There's nobody can complain about hills, right? And things are just gonna get you tired. But it's just, we're next to the bay, right? Which we have a nice wind coming in too. Still, there's some mitigation that we need to start doing in terms of the heat and the sun. Because I tell you, I walk on the street on the south side of the street because I know the buildings are covering me because of how the way some sideways. And there's things we can do. And I love the idea that you bring in Eleni in terms of the application, inform people about that. And it can even do on a crowdsourced environment. We're now trying to launch a program with IC Change, where basically get information from the experience of the user to a system that can help us have a better understanding of what's going on. And hopefully, Eleni, I think we need to follow up about how you translate that to the routing mechanism and how you incentivize people to do so in order to get to that point.
Thank you, Carlos. That was fantastic. I already have follow-up questions for both of you, but before, I know Ryan is doing really interesting work in Phoenix. Also, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Yeah, just to chime in, and it's great to hear so many similar approaches and similar things. In Phoenix, we've had for a long time a tree and shade master plan that we've been working on. But in 2021, the City Council adopted a climate action plan, which kind of reinforced the importance of establishing, increasing our tree shade canopy, establishing cool corridors. So again, cool routes, cool corridors. These are all things that are very similar, where we're trying to create those connections, adding whether it's tree shade or artificial shade canopies. And then in Phoenix, we are, I think, pioneering and leading in actually addressing our paving surfaces with our Cool Pavement program, having great success in piloting that and doing the research and seeing that how that will help mitigate, the urban heat island effect. And of course, our Office of Heat Response and Mitigation is also involved in, helping those vulnerable populations, whether it's unsheltered, that's a big struggle in our region, and it takes more than just our city. It takes a region approach for that, but region-wide cooling centers and then city-specific free cooling and water centers that we activate during the summer. So there's a lot of different things going on, and luckily, in terms of our infrastructure, we don't have sagging streets or anything like that. But it's certainly, again, it's kind of the built-in resilience we already have with it being so hot. So, but that's why we're continuing to innovate, particularly in cool pavement, to try to make sure that we keep our infrastructure resilient.
Oh, I know there's going to be a lot of interest in cool pavement, and I think you have a picture of one of your cool pavement projects. Do you mind sharing that with us for a moment so we can get a idea of what you're talking about?
Sure. There we go. That should be. So this is everyone's seeing that, right?
Yes.
This is one of our cool pavement installations. So you can sort of barely see next to it a typical collector or arterial street, but we're going into neighborhoods and applying a light colored pavement coating with the idea that it will keep the pavement from absorbing heat energy throughout the day, where it then re-emits it at night. We've done over 11 million square feet, about 70 miles of local streets, and we go into neighborhoods like this, and we go throughout our city. We're also, making sure we're considering the shade coverage or lack of shade coverage, but also as part of our study with Arizona State University, want to make sure we are hitting different shade coverages to understand how the product works in different environments as well. So while this kind of looks like it has a lot of trees, we're looking at areas like that to make sure we understand how it works so that we can in the future prioritize installation of this type of material. But the idea is, we want the street to behave more like the natural desert surrounding. So, and I have a few more, but I'll save those for throughout, or if there are questions. So,
well, I'm interested. Just one more question now. So you say you're collecting data. How well is it working? Do you have a sense about how much this pavement can lower the temperature?
So we know that it will reduce the surface temperature by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit throughout in the heat of the day. That is really seen most extremely in our the hot weather months. And then we are looking at the air temperature. That's quite a bit more complicated to try to narrow down any air temperature cooling, just because of how air flows and is heated from one spot to another. So we're still looking at that, but the surface temperature is an obvious benefit. We also found that it decreases the actual asphalt itself underneath from heating up as much. So we think that it will insulate the pavement essentially as well. So we've seen those temperature readings, about 4 degrees difference inside the structure. Inside the structure.
Fantastic, thank you. My next question for all the panelists is, it sounds like several of you have established strategies for mitigating heat, and I'm interested in a little bit more about the plan, and also kind of how you balance developing and working a plan versus innovating and sort of experimenting to try new things, since we're all still learning as the climate changes. Eleni, do you want to start? I know you said that you do have a multi-city strategy. But you're muted.
Sorry, I will start from the end, because I want to say that cities are learning a lot from each other. And like, for example, we are really eager to find out from Phoenix. And we've been following the fact, because Phoenix started something that started in Los Angeles, took something that started in Los Angeles and really decided to scale it up, and to also kind of put a lot of different variables to it, and get the results, which is really important, because cities are now starting to really deal with heat. I mean, it's unbelievable that we have been talking about global warming for so long, and we're now learning from each other and testing things. And I mean, so I just wanted to say that. So innovation happens in different cities still, and we are in city networks that help us actually hear and learn from each other. And this is really, I think it's very helpful. For example, we got the cool seal that I think it's probably the same material that Los Angeles was using, and I think now Phoenix is, and we tried it in a small part in Athens, a small road, and it didn't bond. which I'm so annoyed with. And of course, I made a total fool of me. And the mayor was very upset because the mayor, I mean, these things, innovation can really backfire sometimes. But you have to try it because we really don't know what works and what doesn't work. So we have a strategy. We did the resilience strategy in 2017 that started looking at heat, but more recently we did an upgrade for our climate, a new updated climate action plan, and we did specifically, especially with the support of the Ars Rock Resilience Center, specifically on heat, like a strategy, and basically it's 3 pillars that we're looking at. The first one has to do with awareness raising, and the most important action that we did there has to do with categorizing heat waves. For the first time, we piloted 3 different categories, and we created a categorization of heat waves that has inside it the mortality, like health risk data. So each category is not just meteorological, it also has the risk to human beings in it. So it's really important for city decision makers to actually put, then it's an early warning. So the second pillar has to do with short-term actions that have to do with protecting the most vulnerable. And there it's an early warning system. We have a web page, we have the smart app. For the first time this year, we have a calling line, and we actually got this idea from Miami because they have a hotline from Jane in Miami. And so we created a hotline. We are really close working with the Hellenic Red Cross and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent. And we did capacity building for the people that work with vulnerable communities, et cetera, like a lot of stuff there that are short-term things, again, learning from each other cities. And then finally, the last and the most difficult, which my colleagues also addressed, is actually how do you make the city cooler? How do you lower temperatures? And this has mostly to do with using nature, water, and specific materials and technologies. And this has to do with redesigning the city, especially the public space, but also retrofitting houses. We've been talking about energy retrofits. We haven't been talking about thermal retrofits, which we also have to start thinking that way. It's all very new, and it needs a lot of pushing. So the first category of awareness raising hopefully will help also the last category of getting people to do more things to lower temperatures inside and stop depending on air conditioning.
That's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And you can tell it was even Jane and the team over there was amazing. And, of course, we call it a hotline, right? To talk about this and start getting information back. But
and we call, also playing on this, we call the whole program Cool Athens, which of course is kind of silly, and the hotline. I mean, you can play with these things. And I know it's not, such a...
But that's how things work, right? We need to really draw attention to the impacts and start looking at the opportunities we need to mitigate that, right? So, and I think that way it can really kind of resonate with people, right? How we want to make sure we build a city we want to live in. So in Miami-Dade, we talk about Miami-Dade, which is a combination of 34 municipalities and unincorporated areas. You're seeing a lot of attention to the Miami-Dade kind of group with Miami and Miami Beach working together on the Resiliency 305 in the past. From there, we developed a climate action strategy. So first we planned, now we're actually taking action, right? So it's a lot going on in terms of how we adapt our city to build and be aligned with the strategies that are being identified and some of these efforts. And even just recently, the Rapid Transit Zone development for Miami-Dade County really touching a lot of these elements, which is basically encompassing the envelope of rapid transit corridors within a zonification that allow for different approaches from densification, intensity, and other things will be able to promote more of these elements. Typically, a little different than Athens in Phoenix, we also have to deal with flood, right, with water. Right, so for us, is a balance on how we deal with flood mitigation. It needs to be flood-proof. It needs to be nature-based, and something that is very native and works in Miami. You know, the palm trees are cute. They look great on the picture, but they do nothing for shade. They do nothing for people walking and biking. So now we're getting into a more of trying to focus more on shade trees, and we'll be able to start introducing into our corridors and heat adaptive, right? I think we need to start figure out how we can actually adapt to some of these elements, because we're not going to cool off, right? As a general kind of world and things happening, you know, we need to start figuring out a way that we can adapt to what's going on and basically cool off a little bit and localize and see what we need to do to reduce those heat conditions that are happening. And I think talk about trees, you talk about cars and, you know, and burning oil and things like that, really pushing some of this localized heat. So there's a lot kind of working on that element. I saw one of the comment on the chat from a gentleman that said that they bike a lot in Miami-Dade County, make reference to the Underline. The Underline is a 10-mile linear corridor that we're building with partnership with the Friends of the Underline and the Park Recreation Open Spaces. Of course, we call them pros in Miami. The team from Miami-Dade County to build a park and element under the heavy rail system, which is a little bit of a shade, but it's not enough. There's a tree plan to basically put a lot of trees and vegetation on that, not only from cover from the sun, but even from the corridor adjacent to a 6-lane divided corridor carrying 100,000 vehicles a day, right? So it's really trying to make sure that we accommodate those structures. There's a tree planting effort that's going to happen in there, but at the same time, we start seeing how even nonprofit organizations are working alongside with us, and they just hire a young gentleman. His name is Jake Moskowitz. He's a new CIO, Chief Innovation Officer for the Underline. And together we're going to be looking at innovative approaches to start looking at how we can adapt to the conditions that we have and how we can actually continue to make this great state-of-the-art corridors built in Miami-Dade County, something that's walkable and bike, and you can bike it and scooter and whatever mode you want to use, ultimately as an access to transit. So there's a lot of these things really happening, a lot of strategies coming together. And for us, it's more general than not only heat, flood, and all the other elements are changing in our community.
Can I ask, it sounds like you have such a complex environment with so many strategies coming together. And also you mentioned many municipalities, so there's transit agency, heavy rail, what's the coordination like? Is there like one mastermind that knows all these strategies and keeps them in one place, or what's the mechanism by which all these agencies work together?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, right? So we started with 3 cities, right? 2 cities in Miami-Dade County with the Resiliency 305. Now, I want to say that the county is really taking the lead on this. And while we are a transit agency or a mobility management agency, we're a department of the county. We're one of 27 departments. So it's really a county service that's provided to the community. And unlike some other places in the United States, I'm not sure in Europe, but Miami-Dade County really it is a city of cities, right? So we do have 34 municipalities, but a lot of areas are unincorporated. So we still that kind of relationship. So our mayor, she was elected about 2 years ago. She's phenomenal, and she's really looking forward to kind of address these issues about our environmental impacts that we have, at the same time driving economy and engage with the community, right? And some of the other things are really bringing things together. So she's been kind of the lead in our community, and by hiring a chief heat officer, a chief bay officer, a chief resiliency officer, all these things are really coming together. And you start seeing how Miami-Dade County has really been equipped to deal and collaborate with a bunch of other municipalities that are happening in it. And I think right now the climate action strategy that we have is really strong in bringing basically with a mandate, if you will, from our county to work alongside with all the entities that we have along in the community.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Ryan, I'm already so interested because in how you're coordinating where you're at and what the overarching plan is. I feel like often government, at least in the US, we're so bad at kind of experimenting in a systematic way. But it sounds like you are doing that very intentionally of applying your projects in different neighborhoods and tracking the data. Can you tell us some more about that strategy and if that fits into a broader plan around heat?
Yeah, and I think so part of it was particularly for our cool pavement We knew, to innovate, we want to be on the leading edge, but not the bleeding edge. So we need to make prudent and wise decisions, right? So we wanted to make sure that before even though we did a big pilot project, that before we continued, we had data to back it up. And so we engaged with our local university, Arizona State University, which has a great center focusing on climate, and helped develop that kind of strategy. But we also thought of it kind of in an equity lens as well. We have 8 council districts, so 8 members of the city council all represent an area of the city. So we saw that as, 1, a way to make sure every district got a pilot project, but 2, that all the districts, have slightly different characteristics. So it helps us give that, this has a greater shade need compared to this area over here. So those in combination, really helped us get a great pilot project and allowed us to move forward. Same with cool corridors. We're spreading them out across the city to make sure we're hitting not only the vulnerable populations or places that are lacking shade, but that we're doing that in all parts of the city, not just in one part. Even though there may be a high concentration in one part or another, there's needs across our whole city. The city of Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States, over 520 square miles. So there's need everywhere you look. And so that's part of our strategy, is to make sure we're using data to identify the projects, but also making sure that we're doing them around the city and citywide.
Wow, that's tremendous. Can I ask you one more question on the coordination? As you think about the transportation elements like the cool corridors, how is that integrated with other municipal plans around heat, or is it mostly the transportation agencies working together?
So it's mostly it's interesting. So in Phoenix, our Office of Heat Response and Mitigation is fairly new. I like to say, since it's my program, that Cool Pavement came before our heat office, but we definitely have great support from the heat office and the mayor and city council. And now that those are on board, the heat office is really helping with that coordination within our city. And cool corridors and cool pavement really do fall under the street transportation department, as opposed to the parks department. Every city is kind of made differently. Streets is a separate department than public works, and in some municipalities, those are the same department. So what we're doing in our transportation infrastructure, whether it's trees or cool pavement and mobility, all fall under streets. And so it's we coordinate with our other sister departments and with the heat office. So the heat office is kind of the major umbrella, helping facilitate, but we really do a lot of the driving of, okay, here's where we want to go. Here's the data we have that shows why we're going to go here, here, and here. So kind of, since it's in our wheelhouse, we get to drive it a little bit.
That's great. Thank you.
How about you, Jonna?
Us in Portland, Oregon. That's funny. I have I'm the first chief resilience officer, and I'm relatively new. So we've had climate action strategies since 1990, but we've never had a heat plan, or really our climate planning is really focused on reducing driving and carbon emissions to slow the effects of climate change. We don't have a lot of planning out how we're going to adapt to climate. And this year, the City Council adopted a climate emergency work plan. So we're definitely working in emergency mode right now. And I think we're pretty focused on what we can do in the short to medium term, but also recognizing we need to develop those long-term strategies, which is something Eleni talked about too. And I like this framing of like kind of what can we do for people next summer, and what do we hope to do for people 10 summers from now. So I want to ask a little bit about that, and also about something else it's caught my ear because it's come up several times, which is about vulnerable populations, those communities that that face the greatest risk from heat. And so I think my question is just who do you see as the most at-risk populations in your city, and what, if anything, are you doing to plan for their particular needs? Do you want to start again, Eleni? I know you've thought about it. Oh, the mute.
Sure, I'd love to. So the vulnerable populations to heat are, for all of us, I think, the same. For all of us cities that deal with heat, the same. It's the to a large extent, probably the most vulnerable community is the older people that are living alone and that are above 65 years old. But mostly, you know, the low-income seniors that live alone. I got this statistic this year from the Hellenic Red Cross that most of the people that are the numbers that we have from mortality, about 83% are people that are found in their houses alone that lose their lives because of heat. We usually have an image of people being outside and being heat stroke, and it's a very sad thing to think of these people, and we have to really give priority to them. Another very vulnerable population for the same reasons, because it's really difficult for them, for the body to adjust to the temperature, is the little kids. So we have to also be very, very careful about the youngest in our population, because also their internal thermometers need more maturity, so they can deal better with extreme heat. Then we have also, for the same reason, pregnant women and women that are breastfeeding. Another, of course, very important big kind of part of the population is anybody that have informal or bad quality housing or no housing. So I'm sure that a lot of cities in the US I mean, you guys can speak about this, but the houselessness seems to be a really, really kind of big issue all over the world, but in the US especially lately. So these are populations also. I mean, in other parts of the world, these informal settlements that also we have to do, like in India or in Latin America, the areas that are informally built are particularly death traps for the poor people that usually live in these areas. And another people with pre-existing conditions. And finally, and very importantly, people that work in manual jobs. And this can be outdoors, people that work in fields and in agriculture, but also people that are working in manual jobs indoors when there is no cooling, air conditioning or other cooling ways of keeping the people cool, and or outdoors, like delivery people, or people that we don't even think that are really vulnerable. So there, there was in the US this research that was released last summer about work-related injuries. And how work-related injuries, there were 11 million cases that were examined and correlated to heat, to temperatures. And because most people that go with an injury to the hospital, they don't say, oh, it was because of the heat that I suddenly kind of lost my concentration, or that I was very tired because I never slept because my house was too hot, or whatever. But they figured out that there's a very big underreporting of how much work-related injuries are linked to extreme temperatures, along with tons of other things like violence, etc., etc. But anyway, so this is, I will stop here because I can talk for a very long time, but I'll let the others talk about maybe the long term and short term, because I think I talk too much about the vulnerable population.
So, Eleni, I see that you took my notes, and I send you all my vulnerable users on my side too. But I wanted to add, so yeah, I think the construction workers and people that are building our buildings and are building our cities, that they're building facilities that at some point are going to be cool, but right now they're not. There's a lot of vulnerable components to it. But if I made also some of the unintended consequences of heat in the mobility is the decision that people make when they're walking and biking when it's really hot, right? And I think to me is those are might be able bodies to move around, and go to job and go trying to make things on time, they might make decisions that are in the heat of the moment, if you will, in terms of crossing the street and not looking properly, or perhaps, other components are creating a situation where they can be vulnerable to a crash or a collision, right? So that, to me, there's other consequences that we're not capturing that I really love for us to start looking at that, because if you walk or bike in any of these cities, you start seeing that it is not necessarily pleasant the entire year around. And sometimes you get caught in a decision point when you're not making the right decision, right? Then at the same time, then we need to start building the infrastructure for that, to start securing them and trying to mitigate those potential collisions and risk from the infrastructure point of view, from a shape point of view, and at the same time, from all the services that we have. So I think, Letty, you cover very well in terms of the vulnerable users, for sure.
I think a lot of our
point about transport, about this also, I haven't read about that, and I haven't thought about that, but you're right. That's another aspect that we don't talk about. Good point.
I think in Phoenix, a lot of our program, our goals are, I'll say, fairly short term. We have one of our cool corridors goals is 100 corridors by 2030. Same with increasing our tree shade canopy, but those are also long-term investments in, keep making Phoenix cooler in the long term. And then I think our kind of strategic or specific city programs for near-term relief are our cooling centers. The city operates some, and our region operates several. And I know we in Phoenix recently, passed a law or regulation that the power can't be cut off basically during the summer for non-payment, and to let people catch up, later. But you still run into the issue of, elderly or people without resources that can't fix their air conditioner, even if they have electricity, for example. But air conditioner is almost a requirement in Phoenix, so they already exist. Certainly that has its pros and cons in terms of the environment. And a newer program we have this year was like a volunteer call network to sign up to help, call, check in on particularly the elderly population and make sure, hey, how are you doing? It's hot. Is everything okay? Things like that.
That's a very important. We're trying to do that too. It's a very, very important.
We're doing that in Portland also, both with robocalls and then with follow-up calls from volunteers when someone doesn't answer. Something else we're doing in Portland, and I'm going to come around and ask others, but I said in Portland, heat is relatively new to us. We had so many heat deaths last summer, and then more than we had in the 100 years previous. I mean, it was just astounding. And so we're really in those short-term emergency responses. But one of the things that we've done, getting to the pattern that Elenia has mentioned of the people that face greatest risks are often elders who live alone and don't come out of their house, is concerned that maybe they're not coming out of their house because they don't have a place to go, or they don't have a way to get there. And so TriMet, our regional transit agency, has agreed that anybody that during a heat emergency, which for us is like 100 degrees, transit's free. So you can get on any bus or light rail or streetcar at no cost because they're air conditioned inside, and so that you can just go board the nearest one to cool off, and then the driver is supposed to be able to help you navigate to a safe place to stay cool. So to a cooling shelter or mall, someplace like that where you can go inside and stay cool. There was a lot of political pressure on our transit agency to offer to do that. They're not getting any extra income from that, but they left some people at the bus stop because they couldn't pay their fare in the last heat emergency. And that was such terrible publicity for them that they're right now promising that they'll never turn anyone away. I think in the medium to long term, we might need to figure out a way if we have more and more heat days to make that sustainable for them. But right now their commitment is just, we won't turn anybody away if it's 100 degrees out. I'm interested for others, if you have strategies like that engage your transit agency to get more people on transit when you have air quality problems that come along with heat, or just to encourage people to get out of the house with heat. Oh, and also on us, just for mobility, I'll share, we also have volunteer drivers. So if someone doesn't have a way to get to a cooling shelter, they call 211, our info line. The person on the phone will help them navigate to the nearest transit stop. But if they determine the person has too far to walk, or that they have cognitive or mobility issues that make it hard for them to navigate transit, they can actually dispatch a volunteer to go pick them up at their house and take them to a cool place.
That's great.
So we're working on that. What, anything like that in other cities, or what are you doing to get people, those elders, out of their house when it's super hot?
We have cool stations in each neighborhood, but we know that the transportation is an issue and we haven't been dealing with that. So we've been discussing it, but we haven't found a solution for it. We can't affect the public transportation, belongs to the ministry. That comes back to the question you asked before, Joanna, the Ministry of Transportation, and it's really hard for us in Athens to influence them. But yeah. Electromobility is something we didn't talk, and I'm sure that both Phoenix and Miami is much ahead in relation to us. In Athens, we're just starting to place charging stations, and we have like maybe about, I don't know, maybe 100,000 maybe cars in all of Greece that are electric now, and this will be an important shift both for heat, because cars as air conditions put more heat in the environment, but also of course for mitigation issues. So I was wondering if I would like to hear if you guys have had special policies that support or do you do anything in relation to electromobility? My other colleagues in the windows.
Yeah, I think we are starting our electric, I can't say that, our electric vehicle program. We're starting to look at, public charging stations, putting those into our infrastructure. Also our city fleet, we're looking at that as well. So that is also, I think, still in kind of the baby steps, honestly. But that is definitely something we're looking into. We're also, during the pandemic had just started a micromobility program with the electric scooters, and changed our ordinance to allow for electric scooters in the right of way. They had previously not been allowed, so we're looking at those micromobility options, and we had electric bicycles prior to that, but the market seems to be moving towards scooters, at least in the US. So we're in the initial steps of that as well.
Same with us. We're at the very similar. I just want to say it makes me feel happy that we are not too far behind you guys. We're similar stuff.
So like it expressed, in Miami-Dade County is a city. We have it's a very broad area. So right now, yes, we do have, from a county point of view, from a transit agency point of view, a plan to start transitioning to electric, not only in our buses. We already started getting transit buses being electric. Parking rides and other facilities we're building are committing with electric charging and using solar panels to support that facility. We've also now started a plan for community-based electric charging, right? So they're still in the planning stages, but we have a person dedicated in Miami-Dade County to start working on that and start working with different communities, because again, we have multiple cities within our region on that. But Ryan also kind of touched on a good point, right? One thing is to change everyone from internal combustion to electric car, and the other thing is to remove them from the car altogether, right? So right now we have pushed forward on two wheels, the e-scooters and e-bikes, and right now we're interested about introducing more of these e-bikes because they have a longer reach, right? And I think I've been telling people, I've been around and I do always kind of trying to use different mode of transportation, and so far there's nothing more fun to me and really kind of simple and easy to use an electric bike, at least in the Miami area and some of the places I've been going to, right? So I think it's something that we need to start pushing forward, and we're doing that as we move forward. We're adding, we're having the conversation about how we add charging stations for those, right? So that we can actually create a lot more kind of expansive approach for some of these solutions. And the consideration that we're having is we have 7,500 bus stops in Miami-Dade County. We're responsible for about half of those in terms of putting facilities amenities, and we're just adding now a new design for a shelter that is cantilever that fits in a 5-foot sidewalk, right? And in that area, we're trying to identify what can we do to put more kind of storage for micromobility solutions, start putting bike racks and scooter racks around there. So start talking about it, because again, we're putting a little shelter on it. Cantilever fits in a very narrow area. We're adding 360, we've been adding, I think we're about 100 now out of the 360. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be further along. We'll continue to add those and start adding bike racks and start thinking about this micromobility, because it really can help provide access and mobility without having to think about too much about internal combustion cars to electric cars, because this ultimately has other impacts they have in our community.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of connecting the micromobility, like bikes and scooters, to the bus stops. And I'll just say in Portland, we have the mobile, like bike rentals all over the city that now include electric bikes, and we also have a ton of electric scooters. The city's committed to going to an all-electric fleet by 2030, and we have some big electric charging stations downtown on city streets that we've sponsored. You get preferred parking if you're charging your car. That's always the way, right? And also, I'm really proud of TriMet, our transit agency. In addition to letting people ride for free when it's hot, they've also committed to moving to an all-electric fleet by 2030. So we already have a lot of electric buses on the road, and I think that's the direction that we're going.
Have you seen the charging stations?
For the buses?
Yeah,
they're credible. There's one across the street from my office. We work a lot with TriMet. I love the electric buses because my background is in emergency management. They can also be mobile batteries, right? So you can drive them around, park them, and then you can plug other things into them. The electric buses are super cool.
And trams and electric trams and trolleys and stuff, which some cities have had from the past. And now they are we have these electric trolleys. So there's a whole series of people in Athens that have been dealing with electrical kind of buses with these things in the top. And they're very excited because now all of the fleet, like you guys, is moving towards electrification by 2030. I think that's the target for us as well, which is fun. This is really, really great, especially for mobility, because I totally agree with Carlos that it's one thing we don't want just everybody to replace their car with an electric car. We want to get them out of their cars and reclaim the public space and find other ways of mobility, especially in cities. So definitely. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Something I'm curious if you have this in Athens or others. You guys have figured this out in Phoenix and Miami probably, but we have electric trains, like light and heavy rail in the city with an overhead pickup. But the problem we have is when it gets really hot, those electrical wires start to sag. And so just when we want everyone to get on the train starts going way slower. And then when it gets super hot, the train stops because the lines are dipping too close to the tracks for them to drive safely. So we got to figure out something with our overhead pickups.
That's a very good example of how heat for infrastructure of absolutely. But I want to share with you this thing that I read recently that has to do with Kenya and how they've been actually I'm not sure. In Kenya, what they do is they actually have these rechargeable batteries that they put on the buses, and even retrofit in buses these batteries that they are kind of rechargeable. And also, in general, there's this whole mobility that is with three-wheelers or two-wheelers, which they, instead of charging, there are these, they just change batteries. So there are these systems of just very quickly just grabbing another battery and sticking it to your three-wheeler or your two-wheeler and continuing.
Just do a switch, like the propane tank when you drop it off and get a new one.
Yes, so there are all these, so I think that they're all or microgrids in very remote areas, because anyway, so there's interesting things going on with mobility and electricity, and especially with small vehicles that can really be revolutionary, I think, in the next, especially in communities that are more remote, it can be very interesting how these could actually end up having electrical mobility, like phones, before they even have a car, but have like an electrical scooter or an electrical three-wheeler to actually deal with transportation in ways that, anyway, so it's interesting.
It is. And maybe I think a great segue to my last question, if we have just a minute left, which is what's your long-term vision for the future? If you imagine your city 20, 30, 50 years from now, you had time to experiment more and implement retrofits or make new changes. What's your vision what's your long-term vision that you work towards? And I'll be honest, I don't think Portland has one yet. So I'm very interested in what, what Phoenix or Miami or Athens would look like in the climate future. Who has that?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I can tell you again, so I always trying to tie in the mobility, utopia, or what we're trying to build, the city we want to live in, to the infrastructure we're doing. We started looking at it, it kind of started merging one. So to me, is a lot of better infrastructure for safe and secure kind of a passage of all uses of the road with canopies, right? A lot of green environment. It's places that if we feel comfortable sitting down and talking to a friend, we feel comfortable walking and biking around that, right? So that to us is building that approach and make sure that we have the infrastructure to help mitigate some of these impacts, and we feel comfortable regardless of the time of day, right? So it's not only that in the nighttime or early in the morning, regardless of the time of day, we'll be able to do so. And in terms of electric, mobility, yes, I think we need more bikes and e-bikes. That to me is kind of the future here. But we have to understand that not everyone, whether it's capable or is willing or want to actually do so. So moving into some of the other mode of transportation, and Miami is being very, very innovative and unique in terms of adding kind of mode of transportation and different business models. We have electric golf carts, right? We call it golf carts, not golf carts. It's basically low-speed electric vehicles that can get people around town as an on-demand transportation. It's being very popular in our community because, again, it's a small form factor that takes you where you need to go, and it doesn't have an impact to immediate impact. One of the things that we're doing is called the SMART program, and I'll wrap this up because I'm running out of time, but the SMART program is introducing 80 miles of rapid transit services throughout Miami-Dade County. 80 miles that we're actually developing. Today, we're building 22 miles of a gold standard BRT. Within 2 miles of those 80 miles that we're building, we're gonna have 2/3 of our current population today and 3/4 of our current job employments basically today. By doing densification in those areas, our percentage of people living within those 2 miles is going to continue to increase. We're going to be in the tune of 80 to 90% of people living within those 2 miles. All of a sudden, nothing else really matters. Now we have a bunch of opportunities in terms of bikes, scooters, or e-wheelchairs, and all the things that are really happening, getting people to where they need to go into a high frequent network that we're introducing for rapid transit. So to me, is a lot of that happening, a lot more bus only lanes and things that can help move people efficiently with the freedom of being able to pick the mode of choice.
Awesome.
Yeah. This is, yes, this is very similar. We have visions of city. My vision of my city is a city that we claim the streets back from the cars. Athens is very trafficky and filled with cars and parked cars as well as running cars. And we need to empty the streets from the cars and have much more shady and roads that people can walk on and have water elements. And we have no rivers. We have 80% of the city is non-permeable surfaces. So we need to make them more permeable, have more water, as Carlos was saying, have like this the shorthand for calling it is like the 15-minute city maybe, or whatever, like having multi-centered cities that people can walk to work and do all these things and use slow mobility so it's a much cooler city and a much more attractive city, and with small kind of electric buses doing like very many local mobility things, and with much more houses that are slowly kind of building their outside aspects so that they are actually cooling the inside as well. So not just, yeah, so yeah.
I love that vision. Athens is the oldest city by far. So I feel like your vision maybe takes it back to, it was the oldest parts of the city were never designed for cars. So maybe it takes it back to the future. Ryan,
right.
Phoenix was definitely designed with cars. In the last minute, can you give us a quick vision of what it would be like in the future?
Yeah, I think the quick vision that we're working to is to really facilitate multimodal transportation. So including cars, but allowing for that multimodal option throughout the whole city. Again, although Phoenix is a new, younger city, we are still looking backwards to the native peoples that were here years and years and years ago. So in terms of, agricultural, we've moved from agricultural to urban. So how can we make our urban environment more green, more cooling? Hopefully Phoenix of the future will still be a little bit cooler than it is now, but we are in a desert. So we don't ignore the fact that we are in a hot environment to begin with. But
that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm sure there's more that you could say and all of us could, but that brings us to the end of the hour. So I want to thank you all very much. I've taken so many notes of great ideas that I hope to follow up with you. And I know that this our information will be on the website with CoMotion. I thank them again for hosting us. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day or night, Eleni.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you too.
Likewise.